So welcome back to Wisdom for the Church, and I am joined today by a guest that I've known for a little while, and he's done a lot of good work online, and that is John Harris of Conversations That Matter. So we're going to have a conversation that matters, but not on his channel, Conversations That Matters. We're going to have it on Wisdom for the Church. And if you can't follow that, well, it doesn't matter. We're just glad to have him. John, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, thanks, John. Well, I do a lot of things, I guess. It's hard to answer that question. Someone asked me that on the plane a few days ago, and I'm like, there's a bunch of things I could say. So, I mean, I generally say author, producer, cultural commentator, because that kind of conveys, I guess, most of what I do. But a lot of people know me from the podcast. Some people have read my book. Some people have watched the documentaries I produced. And that's all recent. I've done that for the last maybe 3 years full time. And before that, I was a furniture repairman and a student, and I did some part-time teaching and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I'm involved in my church. Don't get paid for that, but that's the ministry, music ministry mainly, and some college career ministry, and just enjoying life and expecting a baby in July. We just talked about that. So yeah, my wife and I live in upstate New York, and we're doing great.
Yeah. Well, the little bit I do know about you, I know that you're very busy. So thanks for your time, and I know that you'll, in some ways, be even more busy. Once you have your kids. So, but that's really exciting. Obviously, that's a huge blessing from the Lord. So
Yeah, my pleasure. You've been a courageous inspiration, and with being in crew and seeing what you saw and being willing to say something, that's just noble and rare. So we're going to talk about, I know, courage a little bit, but I think you're also someone who's exemplified that, and it's a rare trait these days. So keep doing what you're doing.
thank you, brother. This is an interview about courage. John just transitioned us in. This is probably a little weird for him because he interviews so many people. So I'll be interviewing you, which is a little role reversal for you, I'm sure. The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. And I have the idea here that courage often is founded on, or lack of courage is founded on, a fear of man. Today is all about the lost virtue in general of Christian courage. And so I wanted to start here with you, John. 5-6 years ago, wind the clock back. You started somewhere in there, Conversations That Matter, your podcast, your YouTube channel, and so forth. At that time, was that a scary thing to do at all? If so, why would it have been scary at all, if at all? What were the challenges?
A little bit. It wasn't. It wasn't something I thought would blow up the way it did. So I thought maybe a couple hundred people might see the video that I initially produced on my seminary experience. And if I could just help one person so that they would know they were entering a social justice war zone and not just a seminary that advertised it was about the Great Commission, then I figured I would have done my job. And what happened was thousands of people, though, instead flocked to the podcast. And I talked to someone that night about being in a documentary movie that they wanted to do on this subject. And I was at a conference within a few days, and all these people that I had looked up to in the Christian world knew who I was because they had seen the video. So it was kind of weird and overnight. And at that point, it was a little more scary. I was still able to handle it, but it was hard to. It was like the combination of taking a stand on a controversial issue and watching the online technology that we had ruin people's lives in real time, because you could finally search for things that they had said in the past and things they had done and pictures of them. And so when I had opposition against me, of course, I wasn't used to anyone trying to go back in the archives of things that I had said on Facebook from 5, 6 years, 10 years before. But all of a sudden, these were weaponized in ways that I think a lot of us millennials, we thought the internet was fake world. And And now we're finding out that it's one and the same. In fact, what you say online is like more important now than what you even say in real life. If you have witnesses who say, we heard him say this thing, it doesn't really matter unless it's recorded and available publicly online somewhere. And then all of a sudden it matters. And so that was a new thing too. And so that was scary to navigate, knowing that people could kind of look through my underwear drawer and then try to weaponize it. But it's been, I'd say, a good process. The Lord's used some of those challenges in my life to make me not care quite as much about what man thinks and care more about what the Lord thinks. And it definitely changed the direction of my life. I was going to go towards higher education, and then that didn't seem to be an option because of some of the things I had said that were controversial that now people were listening to. So, so I just had to trust the Lord that that I did the right thing, and that the next step He was going to just provide for me. And He has provided for my family since I started in 2019 doing this kind of thing, and then full time in 2021. So, it's I've watched Him provide for me and others who have taken similar stands in other arenas. I don't feel like mine is actually that unique, or that, many scary things happened to me. I didn't lose a job or anything. I was kind of
Yeah.
like out of the gate disqualified from what I wanted to do, or at least I felt that way. Maybe that's not the case. I didn't really apply anywhere, but I did watch people like Dr. Russell Fuller and others lose their livelihoods, and they had to trust God through that and exude a lot of courage. And so their examples also helped me through my own challenges.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it sounds like with, just, your experience with starting, your podcast, that a lot of the challenges, it wasn't initially like you're just like, oh, I just want to put out this thing and hopefully help a few people. And then when the convergence of like technology and timing of whatever was going on morally at the time, when those two things kind of just happened to hit by God's providence, all of a sudden there's much more of a, like light shining on you, magnifying glass on you, and all of a sudden you're getting a lot of eyeballs, both positive, enjoying what you're doing, thinking, thank the Lord for this message, that we see is, from a biblical perspective against these ideas and ideologies we've been thinking, but you're also getting a huge amount of pushback that you never got before. So it sounds like the courage aspect really came in. Like you're like, oh, I don't know what I was getting into here. I just like
Right.
put a video online, and now I'm like thousands of people are either love me, some of them are like hate me passionately.
Right. Yeah. 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 It's a wild world out there that can happen. So yeah, I have respect for people who are willing to be public in the lion's den, as it were.
Yeah, yeah, and you did mention, academia, or you wanting to go that route at some point in your past, and even I have noticed for anyone who's watched your channel, like you definitely have an academic bone in your body. Like the research that goes into, if you're presenting on a thing, whether it be a ministry or like some topic, I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. And so that is something commendable. I imagine it's hard to be in academia because doesn't seem like academia usually supports controversy or supports kind of being on the cutting edge of a topic or an issue or taking a stand. It seems like usually academia is slower to that. And so if someone is, I don't know, more in that vein, you're going to definitely rustle some feathers, I would imagine. So,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a couple notches more woke than any other field that you can think of, perhaps with the exception of entertainment. So, if you're public about your conservative or Christian beliefs in academia, then you're either at a super small school no one cares about, or a school that's conservative enough that you can go so far. But I think just about every school is slightly woke, even the most Christian conservative universities we can think of. And so, someone who's a true conservative and is public about it, I don't care who they are, but if they are true conservatives in public, they're going to face some ramifications for that if they're
yeah,
vocal.
yeah, yeah, I've definitely noticed that for sure. Um, yeah, just in my own experience. So, well, when it comes to courage, we've talked sort of about your experience a little bit. Other than in general, we could just categorize it sin, fear of man. Is there anything you notice on a practical basis that keeps just your average everyday Christian from living courageously? Broad question.
Well, you said fear of man. I think that's probably the largest thing. They don't want to be judged. They value the approval of man, and they also don't want to lose their livelihood. So there's negative consequences that can come to someone if they're bold and they make the wrong people mad. That someone like their employer, especially.
Yeah.
So I think it's fear of consequences more than anything else. And sometimes you just want to be liked, not even because of so, making a living, or like you could be financially a millionaire, but you just really want people to like you, and it feels good. Um, and to think that they might be talking about you behind your back is something that people who value the opinion of man too much just can't seem to face. So yeah, it's stress. It's hard for the people you love. Some people don't want to do it because it will maybe come back to hurt their children or their wife or their parents or whoever, to be associated with them. And so they're trying to protect someone, and that prevents them from sometimes being courageous. So yeah, ultimately it comes down to, I think, the consequences though, for whatever action.
Yeah, no, definitely could see that. And I think when I think about courage a little bit too, like often, I've highlighted your podcast, and that's like one form of courage that is kind of the most publicly out there. But I don't know if every Christian will obviously have to face the exact same things that you do, or like someone who's on a YouTube, or like a pastor or something. Um, so a thought that came to my mind as I was, just thinking about courage a little bit, preparing for this, was like maybe I overthink it. Maybe we overthink it at times a little bit. Like courage is taking the flagpole stand for an issue of faith. But courage is also just doing my job, like at work, with integrity, even when it's a hard thing to do. Or courage is making a tough call to a customer about, you know, a company mistake or something, even though you don't want to make that call because you're going to get yelled at. Something along those lines. Like, so that's a fruit of courage, even though it's not a direct Jesus is Lord, type of courage. But you're doing that because Jesus is Lord, because He's Lord of truth and He's Lord of goodness and all those, sorts of things. So I don't know. Any thoughts on that though? Do we overthink courage at times? Do we only look at the big, sort of big events out there?
Well, I think courage can be found in small things. It starts there usually. So those who are faithful in little will be faithful in much, and God will give them more. Um, so it's whatever you're afraid of. Some people are afraid of different things. I think John Wayne said it in one of his movies, something like "Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway." I've always remembered that. It's not a Bible verse, obviously, but
Yeah.
it's. I think it's true that it's whatever you personally fear. If you're willing to overcome that and do the right thing and fulfill your responsibilities, that's courage. And so when Joshua tells the children of Israel and they're coming into the land, that there's all these pagan nations that are larger than them, that have better technology than them, that could kill them, he says to be strong and courageous. And the reason is because the Lord's on their side. So um, courage, I think, includes, it's not stupidity. It's not taking chances just because it's the right thing to take a chance. Like there's a calculation perhaps involved, and there's wisdom, but it's the acknowledgement that there's a higher purpose and duty that you have, and that there's going to be ultimately a greater reward, whether that's directly from God because He's got a mansion for us and crowns in heaven and that kind of thing, or if it's just uh, the satisfaction of doing the right thing because God called you to do the right thing. There's a reward that you can then lay your head on your pillow and look at yourself in the mirror, and so that incentive, I think, to do what's right, and knowing that it's a superior decision than doing what's wrong is what produces courage. And there's a wavering that people without courage have when when they have something that they're confronted with, and they really don't actually know if if doing the right thing is actually going to pay. And so,
Yeah.
they may think, you give someone in their job that if I get fired for this, no one's going to rally to my side. I'm going to be alone. It will have produced nothing. It'll just be wasted. So they lack courage because they talk themselves out of it, and then they become shriveled up souls that can't really even function, and they lash out at people who have real courage because it makes them feel bad. And that's like most of academia, in my opinion, right there. That's a good description of who they are. They're people who tend to lack courage. So anyway, yeah, I guess the point is that at the end of the day, in the small decisions and the large decisions, you're willing to inconvenience yourself for the greater purpose and greater good and higher calling.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And all of the foundation of that you're getting to is ultimately God's will and God's character, and God is our strength and God is our direction in Christ. And so
Right.
how do I know what living courageously is? How do I know whether this is actually a courageous decision or just a sinful one? Well, I know because God has revealed himself in the Bible. And so I know what I must do. Might have to think through some things, but we have enough in Scripture to live a godly life. That's very clear. Scripture is sufficient. Um,
That's right.
yeah, so living courageously has a source and has an end and a telos, and we're going somewhere. We're not just, it's not just a spinning compass or something where we don't know what we're doing. A character that I think has really encouraged me is Timothy, someone who scripturally, biblically, we know struggled with timidity because Paul instructs him, do not be timid, but know that you have
Mm-hmm.
a spirit of power, love, and self-discipline. That's through the Holy Spirit. If you kind of naturally fall on one side of the aisle or the other, do you are you typically more in your flesh, more on a Timothy side, or are you more natural personality like a Peter?
Well, there's issues that I'm more Timothy about, and issues I'm more Peter about. So, uh, it's funny you mentioned Peter though, because I don't actually see him as a courageous guy, like characterized by it until Pentecost, and then he's courageous.
Yeah,
But he's doubting Christ on the waves. He's denying Christ when before the rooster crows. So, uh, I guess I see him as someone who the Lord had to do a work for him to be the person he was. Now, what one thing Peter is, of course, is he's always talking and running his mouth, and he's assertive and like extroverted in that way. And so it could be that there might be a personality difference in a way between Peter
yeah,
and Timothy. I'm probably a little more Peter, personality wise. I will tend to voice my opinion and say something. I don't know that that's always the same thing as courage. Some people who are quiet can be very courageous. It just really depends. Circumstances really determine a lot of this, or at least I shouldn't say determine, but they reveal a lot of this. And for me, I had to have circumstances in my life. I was kind of a follower, so my parents say, when I was growing up, and there were circumstances, especially in my early teenage years, that kind of trained me into being more of a leader. I
okay,
was involved in a I don't even know how much I want to say about this. It was a Boy Scout troop, but I think this was one of a couple things that helped me. There was just some things that weren't right in this particular troop, and some kids that were being, I would say, I don't want to say they weren't abused or anything, but it was like they weren't being treated right. And I got the position of being a senior patrol leader, and I had to kind of make a stand on some of these things. And that was a hard thing to do initially. And I felt alone at times. And it was small. I look back at it now, it seems very small, but it was very formative for me in what happened later on in my life. And so I naturally, I think, tend to find myself, if I'm not leading something, I'm at least on the team that's helping lead things. I mean, I just kind of sort of gravitate towards that. Even if I'm not pursuing it, people think that that's who I am. And I don't know if that was all personality. I think a lot of that was experiences that I had that shaped me and um, kind of made me willing to, when I saw something that wasn't right, say this isn't right. And and I saw also, I think, the positive things that can happen when you do that. So people, um, even scouts, who had good good results from me taking a stand against what was being done to them and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it starts in the home. I think it starts, well, it starts in the home, and then it extends to the community, and then it'll extend to careers. And people who aren't used to any of that, haven't had any circumstances where they had to stand up against evil. Once they get to a career and there's like true evil, big time evil, it's much
Yep.
harder to do it because they haven't actually climbed up the ladder to get to the point of being able to. They're still on the ground looking up at this thing. So for parents who might be listening, that's something important to instill within your children at young ages. And there are things you can do, I think, that giving challenges to them, putting them in scenarios where they do need to make these kinds of decisions, making them responsible for things. That all takes and cultivates courage.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, one definite theme. I appreciate you sharing that. Would not have known that story at all. So, um, it seems like something that you've mentioned multiple times or comes out as like a definitely a principle we see probably by just common grace, but also in Scripture. Like the Lord starts a work with a small, remnant or a small amount, or through, Abraham, this great nation was built. Like, and our courage, your courage, like was started small by this testing in a, Boy Scout troop. And then, because you were faithful in that, probably imperfectly, but faithful in that, you've grown in your character. And then down the line, you've got, something better on the way, something greater. And then years down the line, maybe because of those realities 10, 15 years before, or whatever, you're actually prepared to, make a stand in a bigger way than what you knew you were able, but it's by the Lord's strength. But that's just because of the sanctification that He's been working in you for, years and years
Yeah.
and years. So like start small
There's
basically.
always opportunities out there. Everyone has stuff in their lives that isn't right, whether in their family or in in the job or in school or just in society, whatever they're involved with. There's always opportunities for that. And my parents, I have to credit them somewhat, I suppose. They, from a very young age, made me apologize when I did something wrong. They made me face people that I was afraid of because I had done wrong,
Yeah.
and I had to make things right with them. And taught me to defend my younger. I was the oldest, so that placement might make a little bit of a difference. I had to be responsible at times for my younger siblings.
Yeah.
So
The older
then
ones are
when
always
yeah, when it,
responsible and leaders.
well, there's a tendency there. Not all the time, perhaps, but yes. But then yeah, when it came to Boy Scouts and other civic activities, I was involved with soccer. When I went to college, I remember I was starting leading a Bible study, and we actually almost had a lawsuit because of the way that the college was treating us, discriminating against us on the basis of our Christianity and not treating other clubs the same way. And so all of that took courage, because I did not. No one really wants to be involved in a controversy. The people who do, you got to be suspicious of. Like, they're trying to benefit from it somehow.
Yeah.
But most people, they don't want that. They don't want the stress associated with it. And so I had been involved in college career ministries with guys that I had to stand up to because they were doing wrong things, and so all of this transpired before ever starting a podcast. So
Yeah.
it was kind of second nature in a way by the time I got there, that something wrong was happening and someone needed to say something and no one was saying anything. The people that should have said something weren't. The
Yeah.
professors at the school lacked courage. And that is something that people can probably consider too as they're choosing schools, is you really do want people with courage to train you, especially in biblical things, exposition and so forth. And in my experience, very few, extremely few numbers of people actually have the courage necessary. And it's important that you find pastors who are actually shooting wolves and guarding sheep to learn from, even if you're in a seminary situation and that kind of thing. My experience is that those institutions are specifically designed at this point to discourage courage and independent thinking. So find a pastor, find someone that you can shadow, even if you're in that situation, that you can actually learn courage from, because you're probably not going to learn it in seminary.
Yeah, yeah. That's you're highlighting what I believe is a big problem, and you've experienced it firsthand. And you were at Southeastern Theological
Yeah,
Seminary, is
yeah,
that right? Okay,
that's right.
yeah. So that's kind of where you first, well, I guess, experienced that on like a really deep personal level, I'm sure. And I suppose I've been assuming something throughout this interview as a unspoken foundation, but maybe you can comment on it. I am assuming, based on my lived experience as myself and being around other Christians, that courage is one of the biggest lacks in terms of Christian character, I don't know, in our society today. I mean, we could say almost anything is, because we're just an ungodly kind of Corinthian culture that loves pleasure more than God, really.
Yeah.
But,
Oh, yeah.
but in general, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. I have.
I sense this palpable lack of courage. You know, obviously you've experienced that on a seminary level, but do you think that that's a grander problem, just like in the church, average Christians? Am I
Oh, yeah.
overstating it? Yeah.
No,
And
I think you're understating it. It's systemic. It's just
yeah.
expected now that you don't have courage, that you fall into line behind whatever authorities say. And of course, we believe in hierarchy and authority as believers, and we believe that courage is actually one of the things that should be present to gain respect and gain authority and recognition, or platforming and authority. And it no longer is courage. It's actually what's rewarded is if you toe the party line and go along to get along. So if and corruption even helps, even in the Christian world, I think, for you to go from A to B. So we have phony hierarchies in many of our institutions. We don't have men with courage actually leading, and so if someone shows courage, then there's a danger. You become a threat to the people above you, and then you're a target, and people are jealous because you're gaining respect that they don't have, and they didn't ever earn that, but they have the title. So we're in a world of certifications, I think, and professionalism, but not character and courage. And um, so what do you do in a situation like that? If you're someone with the courage, then you end up. My dad says this for years, and it always stuck with me. You end up being the leader because the leader is the one who leads, not the one with the title. And that really frustrates people who have titles and have paid exorbitant amounts of money for degrees when someone outclasses them and gains respect because they're willing to have courage. And I do think that moving forward, we've lived, you and I, our whole lives in a transitional period. And I think that period is going from this sort of managerial elitism that were raised with certifications and all of that, to, and like assuming that makes you a leader, to a leader is someone with skin in the game who actually sacrifices. And I think, whether you like Trump or not, or think he's got, I mean, in many ways he's foolish. And so whether you think he has character, I don't think in some ways he does. But one of the things he does seem to have, with all the braggadociousness and everything else, is there is some kind of a willingness to sacrifice himself for the people he claims to care about.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't care if all the institutions in society are lined up against him. And maybe he's wanting to benefit from it. That's
They will
possible.
be.
Whether he is or not, he's showing he's got skin in the game. He's willing to sacrifice and ruffle feathers for the people he claims to care about. And that makes him a leader, whether people like it or not. He didn't climb the political ranks to get where he is. He made a lateral move or horizontal move from being a business owner to being a politician. And I think we're going to see a whole lot more of that. People who are making horizontal moves that you wouldn't expect to take controversial stands, but they're all of a sudden going to do it.
Yeah.
You think of Elon Musk, even, I'm thinking of very big names, but
Yeah.
Elon Musk has taken a great risk. He's getting sued now all over the place. His businesses are being sued. And he did what he did because he believed in something bigger than himself. And he thought, Twitter is a great communications platform that needs to be saved. And so people end up respecting him because of that. And so, I think that there's a great opportunity for Christians actually to tap into this. And
Yeah.
And demonstrate courage in whatever God, not being a jerk and going out there and picking fights, but whatever God has given you to do and where he has you, there's going to be opportunities in that to demonstrate it. And it might be small, it might be large, but um, I think you'll find out that that when you think that you're going to stand alone, oftentimes that's not the case. There's
Yeah.
going to be people that will rally to you because courage is infectious.
Yeah.
So is cowardice, by the way. They're both
100%.
infectious. But
Yes.
when someone demonstrates a little courage, then it gives other people courage. And they're saying, you know what? I'm willing to now take a stand with you too. I'm not going to be left out of this. Um, so uh, I'm kind of optimistic in this way, even though, as you said in your question, kind of insinuated that there's this great big problem out there, which I think you're right about. It doesn't take a whole lot of people to correct it. Just a few people standing up
Yeah.
can often make a difference. And so that's where we are right now, and that's what Christians need to do.
Yep. Yeah. I would, you said something there that I absolutely can unequivocally say registers with me. I think I know it's true. I think anyone who would watch this knows it's true, and that is courage and cowardice. But courage is infectious. You see one person step out and say the thing that more people than you think are thinking, and it's the thing that needs to be said. And it's amazing how that just opens way more doors than you'd think it would, and can start,
Yeah.
like a little flame, and all of a sudden, that
Well, you
fire
look at
started.
Gideon. I mean, Israel was leaderless. Gideon stood up, and all of a sudden, he had what was it, 41,000 men or something like that gather, and God reduced it to 300, and still expected Gideon to have courage, and he did. But well, Israel was leaderless during the time of the judges, and God would raise these people up, and then there would be a groundswell sometimes around them of others who would follow them.
Yeah, yeah, that is Book of Judges. Every time they were rebellious, things were going overall from bad to worse, but God would, save the people through this military leader, this judge, who it did have to, yeah, absolutely display courage. So, yeah, on the Trump piece you mentioned, that is something fascinating because I think God's common grace. Some might have a different term to use it, but it's such an important category for Christians for us to understand that even unbelievers can use their minds to help the world in a general way, and the work of the law of God is written on the hearts of an unbeliever. And so, even unbelievers give good gifts to their children. We see Jesus say something like that. So, like with Trump, if there's one thing, kind of like you mentioned, that I always felt looking back and maybe forward if he's elected, that he brought, that I'm thankful for, is spine. Because that spine, it revealed, even if he's swinging like all the time, and sometimes he whiffs and sometimes he hits the wrong person, like he's a bull in a china shop sometimes, but at least you knew what he was thinking, and he was going to say what he believed, and like you said, at least try and fight for his constituency, even if it's inconsistently. And that has not been the case for years and years and years. And so he brought spine. And so, in my opinion, it made it much less of an option, especially as the years unfolded, like on the right, to be spineless. It's still
Hmm.
possible, but I think he's opened up a door where, people that have that courage, but also, like, thinking of biblical Christians, we also have God on our side. We have the worldview to be courageous, and also principally courageous toward actual righteous ends. So you get a guy, I know you've talked about him before, but you get a guy like Dusty Devers who shows more spine than your average politician, but he also has,
Hmm.
the platform and the thinking and the godliness and the long term view and policies to kind of back it up too. So I think, like, you know, Trump has done, I'm sure, plenty of wrong things. I don't believe he's a believer. Like you said, he's a fool in many ways. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. He does not really have the fear of the Lord, but by God's common grace, definitely spine, absolute spine. And so I think if it weren't for that kind of thing, I don't think we get principled Christian politicians 2024 before and like onward, to be honest. Um,
Yeah, totally agree.
I've done
Um,
this before in a video. Like to me, on the Christian or on the conservative right, like republicanism as the representation of the right in my whole lifetime, it's just been kind of the same guy over and over and over and over, kind of until Trump. And it's not like
mhm.
Trump is that much better, but it's like Bush equals McCain equals Romney equals Christie, kind of. They might have some different platforms, but it's kind of like the same sort of, we're gonna overall kind of lose and lose gracefully. And Trump just completely, completely shattered that. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, just a whole lot going on politically. Don't want to take too much more of your time. If you had any kind of recommendations in terms of, we've talked about a certain stance that you have taken, which was, in starting a podcast. Obviously, most people are not going to do something like that. Are there any recommendations that you have for people of, oh, here is a great place to start in terms of cultivating godly courage? Maybe it's a book to read, or it's
Hmm.
um, just some kind of
Yeah.
action. It starts in prayer. Just recommendations,
Yeah, it's a good question.
because it has to start small.
When I was younger, I didn't realize the impact of it, but the media that I consumed when I did consume media was generally like military themed movies and Western type movies. I mean, I was a boy. I had two brothers, so it was all swords and guns for me.
Your background
And
is that
well, like growing up, that was
hat
kind of
and like the
oh
antler
yeah,
behind you.
yep. So yeah, and I got my grandpa's World War II cap back there, and yeah, historical stuff, and then so yeah, I mean, I think that that in addition to the Bible stories that I was consuming and um, just the teaching, I got some good teaching. I think really helped kind of lay a foundation for what a man should look like and what courage should look like. And um, I would say, for someone who's an adult that's looking to do that, obviously the first answer is the Word of God. And the stories in the Old Testament we're told were given to us as examples for our own sanctification. So look through the stories of courage that exist there. It's really sufficient. But I think Paul said to follow me as I follow Christ, and the examples that we have of just godly men who live in our own lives can also help. So find someone who's got courage and follow them. And then there's extra biblical and extra experiential things like historical figures who demonstrated a lot of courage. I've always had a great admiration for Eric Liddell, the athlete,
Oh,
because he
Scottish,
had the
like
Scottish. Yeah,
Olympian.
he was a runner, but he was a missionary in China. Actually, the second part of his life, the after winning the gold medal, is more interesting in some ways than that.
Yeah.
But I think he demonstrates a lot of courage. He died in a prison camp, separated from his family. I think I've always thought Robert E. Lee was a great demonstration of courage. And there's a book that I had read years ago called Robert E. Lee on Leadership by someone named Crocker. And it's a really, really good kind of encapsulation of just leadership principles. But a lot of that includes courage. And you're talking about someone who was in battlefield scenarios where he could die.
Yep.
And I think there's a lot of people like that. I mean, some people really admire like George Patton um, and obviously George Washington, the
Mhm.
father of our country, a lot of courage. So you know, it doesn't have to be a military leader, but find someone from church history too that might demonstrate courage and then emulate them, copy them, get to know them through books and things like that. And if you're a parent, make sure that your children have good positive examples before them of leadership, sacrifice, integrity, courage.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. That is a topic I might explore in future videos or something. Like you've tapped into something here with, I think, parents seeking to prep their kids, instill a a foundation in their kids, and also one that does develop some courage because they're having to face tougher situations, take responsibility for their actions, those sorts of things. That's something I want to explore a little bit more because it sounds like that was a huge part of your background, of why.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it definitely helped for sure.
So
So, yeah, you don't need a good, perfect childhood or anything like that. It definitely helps though. So,
yeah, for sure. Well, yeah. Last little bit here. Where can people find you? I know you're on YouTube. Do you have a website?
yeah, johnharrispodcast.com. I think it still works. That'll take you. I tried it the other day and it wasn't, but let me see if it's okay. Worldviewconversation.com is probably better. For some reason, it's not working on my browser, but yeah, you'll find my social media links there. If you just type in conversations that matter John Harris, it'll all come up too. So
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll definitely put a link in the description for people to check out your stuff, and really do appreciate your time, John. Thanks for stopping in.
my pleasure, John.
Thanks,
God
buddy.
bless.
God bless.